Last month, I introduced you to the Alice dress, this beautiful 1897 dimity gown made by my great-great-grandmother. This month, I am going to be sharing with you some of the technical things that are behind the scenes that I've been working on to make sure that I will both be able to do justice to the pattern of this dress and make the pattern, hopefully, available to you guys at some point in the future. Okay, so I think I have a plan. I am going to computerize the keystone bodice, which is pretty much exactly what I'm going to use for the lining of the bodice, and the slim sleeve, which, if I remember correctly, Bernadette Banner had a problem with those sleeves being way too short, but I'm going to go ahead and digitize it just as a starting point, and then I'll probably modify it heavily to create the Alice dress sleeves. Once I have those two pieces digitized, then I'm going to start actually going back to the original dress and analyzing the pieces. So I'm going to double check to make sure that the sleeves are actually that sleeve. They look very similar, like they were cut on that weird like bent arm thing. And then piece by piece I'm going to analyze it, and then I'm going to digitize it. And I'm going to try to figure out how to digitize it properly, so that it will be adjustable like the keystone ones are. I'm not sure I'll be able to make it quite as perfectly, but I'm going to do my best because I do want to be able to translate Alice's dress into a dress that will fit me, which I have very different proportions than she did. I'm a lot taller and my waist is about 5 inches bigger. So I think that's the plan. First things first, let's go back to drafting dynamically. Let's get the 2 keystone patterns done, and then we're going to go back to the dress. Okay, I think that's the plan. Here goes. So the process of digitizing all of these pattern pieces isn't too complicated now that I've got it all set up. I just type in some fancy code over here and then refresh, and boom, we have point B. Look at that, isn't that beautiful? Do it again, we have point C and point A, and now I have a line. And then you just have to do that, a few dozen more times. The process honestly didn't take too long. I think I managed to get this pattern completely finished in about 2 days of work. Once I had the bodice pattern finished, I got started on the sleeve pattern, which went really well at first. And then I started to realize that there were a few issues with my setup. And this takes me into what took me about 2 weeks of work, and that is Bezier curves. Now, I'm going to try to not get too technical here. However, I did have a lot of fun with this, and I wanted to share what I did because I haven't really seen anyone else do it this way. So let me show you what a Bezier curve is, what I did to make them work a lot better for me. Basic Bezier curve looks like this, and I will make sure to link this web page below because it is so much fun to play with, and it really helps explain how these things work. So you have a start point, you have an end point, and you have a control point, which you can move around, and that changes the shape of the curve. Now, the way this all works is quite cool as well. You use something called interpolation. Interpolation is just the distance between one dot and this other dot. We simply use T to show how far along these interpolation points are between our 3 dots. We have the starting point, the control point, and the end point here, and then we have these new interpolation points. The T is going to be the same for both of them, even if these two are way closer and these two are further apart. T is still going to be between 0 and 1, the distance between the first point and the second point. You draw a line between those 2 interpolation points, and then you draw one more point on that line that also follows the same T value, and that gets you a curve. Now, with these most simple Bezier curves, it's pretty easy to turn this around and say, okay, given a specific time, and these 3 points, start, end, and this last interpolation point, find me the control point. And that was fairly easy to do. You just take equations and turn them inside out, and it works. It took a little bit figuring out, but it wasn't too bad. Usually, when you're defining a quadratic Bezier curve, you would need to be able to define the start point, the control point, and the end point, which you can see over here in this version of a Bezier curve. You can do the start point, the control point, and the end point. You pass that over to this function, and it draws your pretty little curve. But what I wanted to be able to do was to define this point right here, this interpolation point, and then generate the control point from that, like over here. You have your start point, your end point, just like over here, and the last interpolation point. And this is how you do that. However, the next type of Bezier curve gets a bit more complicated, and this was the part that stumped me for a very long time. When you have 2 control points, you have a cubic Bezier curve. And you can't just have 1, 2, 3 interpolation points. No, you have to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 interpolation points in order to draw the finished curve, which made this quite a bit more complicated. But now you have a nice, very flexible curve that you can do a ton of different things with. So what I wanted to be able to do in my program was to say, all right, I want to have the interpolation point here, and I want to have one over here with the start and end points, and now tell me where these control points are so that I can actually draw the curve using programming. And you start to have a lot of variables when you have this many interpolations all in a row. It gets pretty complicated, as you can see here. And then you have to solve for this and solve for that and move everything around. And finally, I did manage to get it to work. So now we have cubic Bezier curves available to use in my program. So instead of using these control points, you could just say, I want it to go here, and through here, and over to here. So now I can say I want a curve to start here, go through this point, and end here, and it'll make one nice long curve for me. So now I have the ability to have 2 guide points in the middle, so we can have a much longer, smoother curve. After all of that math, I decided it was time to get back to the actual dress and see if I could manage to figure out any of the pattern pieces, because I was still having no luck finding any patterns from the time that had similar gathered parts. And I've only managed to map out 3 of the pattern pieces so far, but at least those were the ones that were confusing me the most. I decided to start with the inner collar lining, because it was one of the smallest pieces and I figured I'd be able to figure it out easily. Thankfully, the design of the fabric is very consistent and I was able to measure it super carefully and make a diagram of the fabric for myself so I could use that as a reference while examining the garment. So I know exactly how big each of the stripes are, I know how far apart they are, I know how big the rosebuds are and how far apart those are. So all I really have to do is start circling where the rosebuds are on the pattern piece that I have and how far away they are from the edges of the pattern piece, and I can start to map out a basic shape. Obviously, there's some warping over time, but this should help me to get a pretty good idea of what the pattern piece should look like. So I managed to figure out the collar lining, which was pretty smooth and a fairly standard collar. And then I figured out the outer collar pattern, which is quite an unusual shape. I went back through all of my books to see if I could find something similar to this, and I can't. I can't find any collar piece, especially from this time period, that is so dramatically curved like this to create such an interesting puffy effect. I also worked on the front yoke pattern, and I'm pretty happy with how all of those turned out. And I am planning to add them to drafting dynamically soon, and I will still do that, I just ran out of time this month. So yeah, it's been a pretty busy month, even though I don't have a lot of sewing to show for it. However, I am very happy with the progress that I've made, and I think I have all the systems ready so that over the next couple of weeks I should be able to start actually putting things together and maybe even making some mock-ups. That's definitely high on my list. If you would like to get more behind the scenes updates, make sure you check out my Patreon. I post updates there several times during the month, and you always get to see new videos ahead of time. I hope you enjoyed this little peek into the technical side of things, and stay tuned next month for hopefully some actual sewing.